The dust cloud on the horizon appeared first a small, billowing plume that gradually revealed a lone figure with a basket balanced on her hip. Gabriel Cheswick had no way of knowing that this stranger's arrival would change everything for Quentin Shaw and the remnants of what he once called a family. The year was 1873, and Fort Davis, Texas, had seen its share of drifters, but none quite like her. Quentin Shaw stood on the weathered porch of his ranch house, squinting against the morning sun. 6 months had passed since typhoid fever had claimed his wife, leaving him with 2 children he barely knew how to speak to, much less raise. His son Thomas, 11 years old and already hardening like the West Texas soil, had taken to avoiding his father. 8-year-old Ellie hadn't spoken a word since her mother's passing, as if her voice had been buried alongside Sarah in the small cemetery behind the church. "Another drifter looking for work," Quentin muttered to himself, adjusting his gun belt from habit rather than necessity. Fort Davis had been quiet lately, the railroad having shifted the tide of opportunity elsewhere. The military post still brought some business, but the boom days were waning. As the figure drew closer, Quentin realized it was a woman young, perhaps in her early 20s, with a determined gait that belied the weight of the basket she carried. Her dress, though travel-worn, was of good quality, and her hair was pinned neatly beneath a practical bonnet. Not a drifter then, he thought. Certainly not one of the soiled doves from the saloon in town. "Morning," she called out when she was within earshot, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. "I'm looking for the Shaw Ranch." Quentin's hand instinctively moved to his hat, a courtesy his mother had drilled into him long before he'd headed west. "You found it, madam." She smiled then, and something about it made Quentin straighten his posture. "I'm Gabriel Cheswick. Judge Hamilton said you might be looking for help with your children." The judge's name caught Quentin off guard. Hamilton was one of the few men in the county he respected, but he didn't recall mentioning needing help. Then again, the old man had a way of seeing what others tried to hide. "Judge Hamilton's mistaken," Quentin replied stiffly. "We manage just fine." Gabriel's eyebrows rose slightly as she glanced around the yard. Chickens wandered freely through the tall, uncut grass. A stack of dirty dishes was visible through the open kitchen window. Thomas was nowhere to be seen, though the sound of an axe striking wood echoed from behind the barn. "I see," she said, not bothering to hide her skepticism. "Well, I've brought bread." She lifted the cloth covering her basket, revealing several loaves that sent a wave of fragrance across the space between them. "Fresh baked this morning. The judge said your children might appreciate it." Quentin's stomach betrayed him with a growl. It had been months since they'd had proper bread. His attempts had resulted in dense, nearly inedible loaves that even the chickens pecked at suspiciously. "The children are busy," he said, but his resolve was weakening. "Mr. Shaw," Gabriel said, her tone softening, "I'm not here to intrude. But I've come a long way and I could use a cup of water before heading back to town." It was a simple request, one that even his frontier courtesy couldn't deny. "Of course, come in." As he led her into the house, Quentin became painfully aware of its state. Dust covered nearly every surface. Sarah's mending basket still sat by her rocking chair, untouched since her passing. The floors hadn't seen a proper scrubbing in months. Gabriel set her basket on the kitchen table and glanced around without comment. When Quentin handed her a tin cup of water, she accepted it with a nod of thanks. "Judge Hamilton didn't send you, did he?" Quentin asked suddenly. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Not exactly. I overheard him speaking with the preacher about your situation. I've been looking for work and I have experience with children. You're not from around here." "No, sir. I'm from Missouri originally." She hesitated, then added, "I lost my family in the war, been making my way west since." Something in her tone told Quentin there was more to the story, but he didn't press. Everyone who came west carried their burdens. Some were just better at hiding them than others. "I don't have much to offer in terms of payment," he said, surprising himself. He hadn't intended to consider her proposition. Room and board would be sufficient to start, Gabriel replied, "and perhaps a small wage once you see I'm worth it." The door creaked open behind them and Ellie appeared, her small face smudged with dirt, her dark hair escaping from its braid. She froze at the sight of the stranger, her eyes wide. Gabriel crouched down to the child's level, her movements slow and deliberate. "Hello there, you must be Ellie." "I'm Miss Cheswick, but you can call me Gabriel if you like." She gestured to the basket on the table. "I've brought fresh bread, would you like some?" Ellie didn't speak, but her eyes darted to the basket, then to her father, asking silent permission. "Go ahead," Quentin said softly. Gabriel unwrapped a loaf and broke off a piece, offering it to the child. Ellie took it carefully, as if afraid it might disappear, then took a small bite. Her eyes widened at the taste. "Good, isn't it?" Gabriel smiled. "My mother taught me to bake. She always said good bread could mend a broken heart." Ellie took another bite, then unexpectedly extended her small hand, offering a piece to her father. The simple gesture, the first time she'd initiated any interaction with him in months, caught Quentin off guard. "Thank you, darlin'," he said, his voice rougher than intended. The bread was indeed excellent, nothing like the heavy, tasteless loaves they'd been subsisting on. Gabriel watched the exchange with a thoughtfulness that made Quentin uncomfortable. She sees too much, he thought. Pa. Thomas's voice rang out from the yard. "That Wilkins cow got into the garden again," Quentin sighed. "Excuse me, Miss Cheswick." "Gabriel, please," he nodded. "Gabriel, I need to go," she said. "I'll be here when you return." Outside, Thomas was attempting to chase the neighbor's wayward cow from what remained of Sarah's vegetable garden. The boy's face was flushed with exertion and frustration. "Who's the woman?" Thomas demanded as soon as Quentin approached, not bothering with formalities. "Mind your tone," Quentin warned, though without much conviction. He'd lost the will to discipline months ago. Together they managed to guide the cow back toward the fence line that separated their property from the Wilkins ranch. The fence had needed mending for weeks, but Quentin hadn't found the time or energy. "She's looking for work," Quentin finally answered his son's question. "Helping with the house and with you and your sister." Thomas's face darkened. "We don't need help. Look around, son. We're barely getting by." "We're fine," Thomas insisted, echoing his father's earlier words to Gabriel. "She's not Ma." "No one's trying to replace your mother," Quentin said, the familiar ache of grief tightening his chest. "But we can't go on like this." Thomas kicked at a stone, sending it skittering across the dirt. "You're the one who can't go on. You barely even look at us anymore." The accusation landed like a physical blow. Quentin opened his mouth to deny it, but the truth was there between them, as tangible as the broken fence. "Thomas, forget it," the boy muttered, already turning away. "I'm going to fix the fence." Quentin watched him go, the distance between them seemingly growing wider with each passing day. Sarah would have known what to say, how to bridge the gap. But Sarah was gone, and he was drowning in the responsibilities she had once managed with grace. When he returned to the house, he found Gabriel at the kitchen pump, sleeves rolled up, washing dishes. Ellie sat nearby on a stool, solemnly drying each item and placing it in a neat stack. "You don't need to do that," Quentin said, embarrassed by the mountain of dirty dishes. "I don't mind," Gabriel replied, not pausing in her work. "Ellie and I are becoming acquainted, aren't we?" The little girl nodded, the hint of a smile on her face that made Quentin's heart twist. It was the most animation she'd shown in months. "I should warn you, Thomas isn't keen on the idea of help," Quentin said quietly. Gabriel glanced up, her hands continuing their work. "I wouldn't expect him to be. He's at an age where pride is everything, especially for a boy who's had to grow up too quickly." Her assessment was surprisingly perceptive. "You know a lot about children." "I helped raise my younger brothers after my mother died," she said simply. "Boys that age need respect more than discipline." Outside, the sound of hammering indicated Thomas had indeed started on the fence. Quentin felt a pang of guilt. That was his job, not his son's. "I should help him," he said, moving toward the door. "Mr. Shaw," Gabriel called after him. "When you're finished, dinner will be ready at sundown." Her quiet confidence, the easy way she had stepped into the chaos of their lives, left Quentin momentarily speechless. He nodded and stepped outside, wondering what exactly he had agreed to by allowing her to stay. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of physical labor. Working alongside Thomas on the fence proved easier than talking to him. The boy had a natural aptitude for ranch work, his small hands already calloused from months of picking up his father's slack. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, the smell of cooking food wafted from the house a rich, savory aroma that made Quentin realize how long it had been since they'd had a proper meal. Next to him, Thomas paused in hammering, his nose lifting slightly. "Smells good," the boy admitted grudgingly. "Yes, it does," Quentin agreed, setting down his tools. "Let's get cleaned up." The kitchen was transformed when they entered. The table was set with the family's neglected dishware now gleaming clean. A pot of stew bubbled on the stove, and fresh bread different from the morning loaves sat cooling on the windowsill. Ellie was carefully placing spoons beside each plate, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. Gabriel stood by the stove, stirring the stew. She had found an old apron of Sarah's, and the sight of it wrapped around her waist gave Quentin a moment's pause. But it wasn't Sarah's face that turned to greet them, but Gabriel's flushed from cooking, her hair escaping its pins. "Perfect timing," she said. "There's wash water on the back porch." Thomas glanced at his father, clearly expecting resistance to this woman giving orders in their home. But Quentin merely nodded toward the back door. "Go on." Dinner was the first meal in months that didn't feel like a funeral. Gabriel kept the conversation flowing, sharing stories of her journey west that captivated even Thomas. She asked questions about the ranch, listened intently to Quentin's abbreviated answers, and somehow made Ellie smile twice. "Where will you sleep?" Thomas asked bluntly when the meal was nearly finished, his tone making it clear he still wasn't convinced of Gabriel's place in their home. "Thomas," Quentin admonished, but Gabriel shook her head. "It's a fair question," she said, meeting the boy's challenging gaze. "I thought perhaps the small room off the kitchen, if that's suitable." The room had been Sarah's sewing room, barely large enough for a narrow bed. It had remained untouched since her death. "That would be fine," Quentin said before Thomas could object. "We can move things around tomorrow." Later, after the children had gone to bed, Quentin found Gabriel on the porch staring up at the vast Texas sky. The stars were brilliant, untouched by the haze that hung over larger settlements. "They're good children," she said without turning. "You should be proud." "Sarah deserves the credit," Quentin replied, leaning against the porch railing. "I was gone too much. Always another herd to drive, another season of work." Gabriel was quiet for a moment. "My father was the same way, always chasing the next opportunity. Did he find it?" "No," she said softly. "Just an early grave in Virginia." The war hung between them, unmentioned but present. Quentin had managed to avoid the fighting, being too far west when it broke out and with a young family to support. But he'd seen the aftermath in the broken men who drifted through, looking for new beginnings. "Judge Hamilton really didn't send you, did he?" Quentin asked, returning to their earlier conversation. Gabriel turned to face him, her expression honest. "No, but I did speak with him. Asked if he knew of any families needing help. He mentioned yours, said you were too stubborn to ask." Quentin let out a soft laugh. "That sounds like the judge." "I'm not here out of pity, Mr. Shaw," she continued. "I need work and you need help. It's a fair arrangement." Her directness was refreshing after months of sidelong glances from townspeople, their awkward attempts at sympathy. "Quentin," he said, "if you're going to be living here, you might as well use my name." She nodded. "Quentin, then." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, the night sounds of the ranch crickets, the occasional low of cattle, the creak of the windmill surrounding them. "I should turn in," Gabriel finally said. "Tomorrow will be busy." "Gabriel," Quentin called softly as she reached for the door. "Thank you for the bread for today," she smiled, the moonlight catching in her eyes. "You're welcome, Quentin. Good night." After she'd gone inside, Quentin remained on the porch, considering the strange turn the day had taken. For the first time in months, the crushing weight of grief and responsibility felt lighter. Whether it was the proper meal in his belly or the unexpected kindness of a stranger, he couldn't say. As summer stretched into its full glory, Gabriel's presence at the Shaw Ranch became less of a novelty and more of a cornerstone. The house, once neglected and silent, gradually transformed. Windows that had been shuttered were thrown open to the Texas breeze. Floors were scrubbed, furniture polished. Meals became events rather than necessities. Thomas remained wary, but his resistance softened as Gabriel respected his boundaries. She never tried to mother him, instead treating him as an equal partner in the running of the household. She asked his opinion on ranch matters, deferred to his knowledge of the animals, and never commented when she found him crying behind the barn on the anniversary of his mother's death. Ellie blossomed like a desert flower after rain. Though she still didn't speak, she had developed a system of gestures and expressions that Gabriel seemed to understand intuitively. They spent hours together in the kitchen, Gabriel teaching the girl her mother's recipes, carefully transcribed in a small notebook she kept in her apron pocket. For Quentin, the change was more complex. Having a woman in the house again stirred feelings he'd thought buried with Sarah, not just grief and longing, but a reawakening of possibilities. He found himself noticing things. The way sunlight caught in Gabriel's hair when she gathered eggs in the morning, the small furrow between her brows when she concentrated on mending, the surprising sound of her laughter when Thomas begrudgingly shared a joke at dinner. One morning in late July, Quentin returned from checking the north pasture to find Gabriel hanging laundry in the yard. The sight was ordinary enough, but something about the domesticity of it, the rightness of her presence on his land, made him pause. She hadn't noticed him yet, and he took the moment to observe the efficient movements of her hands, the soft humming that accompanied her work, the way she'd adapted to the harsh Texas climate, her skin now kissed golden by the sun. "You're staring, Mr. Shaw," she called without looking up, and he realized she'd been aware of him all along. "Just admiring the view," he replied before he could think better of it. Gabriel glanced up then, a clothes pin held between her teeth, her eyes crinkling with amusement. She removed the pin and secured a shirt to the line before responding. "Careful, or folks might think you're developing a fondness for your housekeeper." "Would that be so terrible?" The question slipped out before he could stop it, hanging in the air between them, Gabriel's hands stilled. "It would be complicated," she said finally. "I'm in your employ and you're still grieving." Quentin moved closer, taking a wet sheet from the basket and passing it to her. Their fingers brushed, a brief contact that nonetheless sent warmth up his arm. "I'll always miss Sarah," he said quietly. "But I'm starting to think there might be room in a person's heart for more than one kind of love." Gabriel's eyes met his, searching. Whatever she saw there made her expression soften. "Quentin, Pa," Thomas's voice broke the moment. The boy came running from the direction of the creek, his face flushed with excitement. "There's a herd of mustangs down by the water." Wild horses occasionally passed through their land, following ancient migration routes. Quentin had promised Thomas they would try to catch one for him to train when he was ready. "How many?" Quentin asked, stepping away from Gabriel with a lingering glance that promised their conversation wasn't over. "At least 20, Thomas replied breathlessly. "With a big black stallion leading them." "Let's take a look," Quentin said, already moving toward the barn for his rope. "Gabriel, would you mind go?" she said with a smile. "Ellie and I will finish up here." The Mustang herd provided a welcome distraction from the growing tension between Quentin and Gabriel. For 3 days, he and Thomas camped by the creek, observing the wild horses and planning how to separate a likely yearling from the group. The time alone with his son was healing, a chance to rebuild the connection that had frayed since Sarah's death. On the 4th morning, they managed to rope a young mare with promising lines and a calm disposition. Leading her back to the ranch was a slow process, but Thomas's pride in their accomplishment made every difficult step worthwhile. As they approached the house, Ellie came running out to meet them, her small face alight with excitement. She gestured emphatically toward the new horse, her hands making enthusiastic patting motions. "Yes, you can pet her once she's settled," Quentin promised, smiling at his daughter's animation. Gabriel appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "Successful hunt, I see," she called, her expression warm as she took in the sight of father and son leading their prize. "She's mine," Thomas announced proudly. "Pa says I can train her myself." "She's beautiful," Gabriel agreed, coming down the steps to get a better look. "What will you name her?" Thomas considered the mare thoughtfully. "Liberty," he decided, "because she chose to come with us." Quentin exchanged a glance with Gabriel over the boy's head, both recognizing the significance of his words. The young horse hadn't exactly chosen captivity, but Thomas's framing of it spoke to his growing understanding of freedom and responsibility. "Liberty it is," Quentin said, squeezing his son's shoulder. "Let's get her settled in the corral." As August gave way to September, a new rhythm established itself at the Shaw Ranch. Mornings began with Gabriel and Ellie preparing breakfast while Quentin and Thomas tended to the livestock. After the meal, they would separate for various chores, Gabriel teaching Ellie writing and arithmetic at the kitchen table, Quentin working with the cattle or repairing endless ranch equipment, Thomas dividing his time between regular chores and training Liberty. In the evenings, they gathered on the porch if the weather was fair, or around the fireplace if it wasn't. Gabriel had discovered Sarah's old Bible and began reading stories from it, her clear voice bringing the ancient words to life. Sometimes Quentin would play his harmonica, a skill long neglected that he'd rediscovered when he found Ellie listening intently to a passing traveler's music. It was during one such evening, with the first hint of fall crispness in the air, that Thomas asked the question they'd all been avoiding. "Are you staying for good, Miss Gabriel?" The harmonica's notes faded as Quentin lowered the instrument, waiting for her answer. Ellie, who had been leaning against Gabriel's side as she listened to the music, looked up with equal interest. Gabriel set aside her mending. "I don't know, Thomas." "That depends on a lot of things." "Like what?" the boy pressed. She glanced at Quentin, their eyes meeting briefly before she returned her attention to Thomas. "Like whether I'm still needed here, whether it's the right place for me." "You're needed," Ellie said softly. The words hung in the air, stunning everyone into silence. It was the first time the child had spoken since her mother's death, nearly 9 months earlier. "Ellie," Quentin breathed, setting aside his harmonica and kneeling in front of his daughter. "You spoke." The little girl nodded solemnly. "Miss Gabriel needs to stay," she repeated, her voice rusty from disuse but determined. Gabriel's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Ellie," she whispered, pulling the child close. "I've been waiting so long to hear your voice." "I know," Ellie said simply. "I was saving it for something important." Quentin looked at Gabriel over his daughter's head, his own eyes suspiciously bright. In that moment, something shifted between them, an understanding that transcended words. Later that night, after the children had gone to bed, still buzzing with excitement over Ellie's breakthrough, Quentin found Gabriel in the kitchen, kneading dough for the next day's bread. The rhythmic motion of her hands was hypnotic, her focus absolute. "You gave my daughter her voice back," he said from the doorway. Gabriel looked up, a streak of flour on her cheek. "No, Quentin, Ellie found her own voice when she was ready. Because of you." He moved closer, drawn to her in a way that was becoming increasingly difficult to deny. "You brought life back to this house, to all of us." He reached out, gently brushing the flour from her cheek. His hand lingered, cradling her face. "You only arrived with a basket of bread," he said softly, "and somehow began restoring everything broken in our lives." Gabriel's hands stilled in the dough. "Quentin," she whispered, "we should be careful." "I've been careful my whole life," he replied, "careful and responsible and dutiful. And then I lost Sarah anyway, and I thought that was the end of any chance at happiness, until you walked up that road." Her eyes searched his, looking for reassurance or perhaps permission. "The children want you to stay, as do I," He took a deep breath. Not as our housekeeper, Gabriel, as something more. It's too soon, she protested, though she didn't pull away from his touch. People will talk. Let them, Quentin said with a conviction that surprised even him. I've spent too long caring about what others think, and it's cost me precious time with my family. I won't make that mistake again. Gabriel's resistance wavered, her expression softening. I care for you, Quentin. More than I should, perhaps. But are you certain this is what you want? In answer, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers, a gentle kiss that held the promise of deeper passion. Gabriel hesitated only a moment before responding, her flower-covered hands coming to rest against his chest. When they parted, her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright. Oh, she breathed. Quentin smiled, the first genuine smile that had reached his eyes since Sarah's death. Is that answer enough? Their courtship progressed quietly over the following weeks. To the outside world, Gabriel remained the Shaw family's housekeeper, but within the sanctuary of the ranch, subtle changes marked the evolution of their relationship. Hands lingered during the passing of dishes at meals. Conversations stretched late into the evening after the children were asleep. Glances exchanged across rooms held new meaning. Thomas, perceptive beyond his years, noticed the shift. One afternoon, as he and Quentin worked to repair a wagon wheel, the boy broached the subject with characteristic directness. Are you going to marry Miss Gabriel? Quentin nearly dropped the hammer he was holding. What makes you ask that? Thomas shrugged, focusing intently on holding the wheel steady. You look at her the way you used to look at Ma. The simple observation cut to the heart of Quentin's lingering guilt. Would that bother you? He asked carefully. If I did have feelings for Gabriel, Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Ma wouldn't want you to be alone, he finally said. And Miss Gabriel, she understands things. What kinds of things? About liberty, Thomas replied, referring to his young horse. About how you have to be gentle but firm, how you have to earn trust. He paused, then added, about me and Ellie. Quentin set down his tools, giving his son his full attention. Thomas, no one will ever replace your mother, not for me, and certainly not for you and your sister. I know that, the boy said with a maturity that made Quentin's chest ache. But Miss Gabriel makes things better. She makes you better. The truth of his son's words struck Quentin forcefully. Gabriel had indeed made him better, more patient, more present, more alive. Yes, he admitted, she does. Thomas nodded, as if confirming something to himself. Then you should marry her before she comes to her senses and realizes what a grouchy old man you are. The unexpected humor from his usually serious son startled a laugh from Quentin. He cuffed the boy lightly on the shoulder. Watch who you're calling old, son. Their conversation lingered in Quentin's mind as autumn deepened. Fort Davis transformed with the season, the surrounding hills taking on the golden hues of changing grass. The town prepared for its annual harvest festival, a tradition that brought together the scattered ranching families of the region. We should attend this year, Gabriel suggested one evening as she read the announcement posted in the town's weekly newspaper. It would do the children good to socialize. Quentin hesitated. They had avoided most community gatherings since Sarah's death, his own discomfort with sympathy and prying questions keeping the family isolated. But Gabriel was right, Thomas and Ellie needed more than just their small family circle. All right, he agreed, but on one condition. Gabriel looked up curious. Which is? That you accompany me not as our housekeeper but as my guest. A slow smile spread across her face. Are you asking me to step out with you, Quentin Shaw? I believe I am, Miss Cheswick, he replied, enjoying the way her cheeks colored at his formal tone. The Harvest Festival transformed the normally sedate Main Street of Fort Davis. Bunting and lanterns hung from every available surface. Tables groaned under the weight of food brought by families from miles around, and a small band of musicians filled the air with lively tunes. Ellie, dressed in her best pinafore with a blue ribbon Gabriel had carefully threaded through her braids, stared wide-eyed at the festivities. Thomas attempted to maintain his dignity, but the excitement of seeing friends from school soon had him running off with a group of boys his age. "He looks happy," Gabriel observed, standing close enough to Quentin that their arms brushed. She wore a simple dress of deep green that brought out the gold flecks in her eyes, her hair arranged more elegantly than her usual practical style. "They both do," Quentin agreed, watching as Ellie was welcomed into a circle of small girls preparing for a ribbon dance. His daughter's voice, though still used sparingly, had grown stronger each day. Several townsfolk approached them, curiosity evident in their expressions at seeing the reclusive widower Shaw in attendance and with his pretty housekeeper at his side, no less. Quentin weathered their not-so-subtle inquiries with newfound patience. Gabriel's steady presence beside him a grounding force. Judge Hamilton found them sampling Mrs. Peterson's renowned apple pie. The elderly jurist's shrewd eyes took in their proximity, the comfortable way they stood together, and a smile creased his weathered face. "Miss Cheswick," he greeted her warmly. "I see you found employment with the Shaw family after all." "Yes, Your Honor," Gabriel replied with a smile. "Thank you for pointing me in their direction. And you, Shaw," the judge continued, turning to Quentin, "finally decided to rejoin the land of the living, I see." Quentin didn't miss the double meaning in the old man's words. "Yes, sir, found I had reason to." Hamilton nodded approvingly. "Good, good. Sarah would be pleased." The mention of his late wife might once have sent Quentin retreating into grief, but now he found he could accept the judge's words for what they were, a blessing. "I believe she would," he agreed quietly. As evening fell and lanterns were lit throughout the square, the band struck up a waltz. Couples moved to the wooden platform that served as a dance floor, their shadows stretching and merging in the golden light. "Dance with me," Quentin said to Gabriel, offering his hand. She hesitated, glancing around at the watching townsfolk. "Are you sure? People will talk." "Let them," he said, echoing his words from weeks earlier. "I want to dance with the woman I love." The declaration hung between them, simple and profound. Gabriel's eyes widened. "Quentin, I love you," he repeated, more certain with each word. "I didn't expect to find love again, but here you are, and I'd be a fool to deny it any longer." Tears gathered in Gabriel's eyes, but her smile was radiant as she placed her hand in his. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have since that first day when you let a stranger with a basket of bread into your home." He led her to the dance floor, aware of the eyes following them but finding he no longer cared. As they moved together to the music, the rest of the world seemed to fade away. "Marry me," Quentin said softly, the words meant for her alone. Gabriel's steps faltered momentarily before she regained the rhythm. "Are you certain? It hasn't even been a year since Sarah died," he finished for her. "I know. But she'd be the first to tell me that life is too precious to waste in mourning when happiness is within reach. And the children already adore you," he assured her. "Thomas as good as gave me his blessing weeks ago." Gabriel laughed softly. "Did he now?" "Said I should propose before you came to your senses about what a grouchy old man I am." "Wise boy," she teased, her eyes dancing with joy. "But I'm afraid I've already lost my senses completely where you're concerned." "Is that a yes, then?" "Yes," Gabriel whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you, Quentin Shaw." As if sensing the significance of the moment, the band transitioned to a more spirited tune. Quentin spun Gabriel in a circle, his heart lighter than it had been in years. Across the square, he caught sight of Ellie watching them, her small face alight with happiness. Thomas stood nearby with his friends, trying to appear disinterested but unable to hide a pleased smile. Judge Hamilton raised his glass in a silent toast when Quentin caught his eye, the old man's expression knowing. The next morning, as the family shared breakfast, Quentin cleared his throat and addressed the children. "I have something important to tell you both." Thomas and Ellie looked up expectantly from their plates. "Last night I asked Miss Gabriel to marry me," Quentin said, reaching across the table to take Gabriel's hand, "and she said yes." Ellie immediately scrambled from her chair and threw her arms around Gabriel. "Will you be our mother now?" she asked, her voice clear and hopeful. Gabriel hugged the child close, her eyes meeting Quentin's over Ellie's head. "If you'd like me to be." "Yes, please," Ellie replied emphatically. Thomas remained in his seat, his expression more measured. "When's the wedding?" he asked after a moment. "We thought perhaps before winter sets in," Quentin answered. "A small ceremony here at the ranch." The boy nodded slowly. "Will we need to move Ma's things from your room?" The question revealed the depth of Thomas's understanding and his lingering concerns. Quentin felt a surge of pride at his son's maturity, mixed with sadness that he'd had to grow up so quickly. "Some things, yes," he said honestly. "But others we'll keep, just as we'll always keep our memories of her." Thomas seemed satisfied with this answer. "I think Liberty will be ready to ride by then," he said, changing the subject in a way that signaled his acceptance. "Maybe Miss Gabriel would like to learn." Gabriel smiled warmly at the boy. "I'd like that very much, Thomas, thank you." The wedding took place on a crisp November afternoon, with the Davis Mountains providing a majestic backdrop to the simple ceremony. Judge Hamilton officiated, his legal authority supplemented by a brief blessing from the circuit preacher who happened to be passing through. Ellie scattered wildflowers gathered from the last blooms of the season along a path from the house to the large oak tree where the ceremony was held. Thomas stood proudly beside his father, the gold watch that had been Quentin's father's and would someday be his gleaming in his hand as he solemnly presented the rings when called upon. Gabriel wore a dress of soft ivory, ordered from a catalog and altered by her own skilled hands. Her only ornament was a locket that had belonged to her mother, containing small portraits of her parents. The gathering was small but meaningful neighboring ranchers, a few friends from town, and even Gabriel's former employer, Mrs. Wilson from the boarding house, who dabbed at her eyes throughout the ceremony. "By the power vested in me by the great state of Texas," Judge Hamilton proclaimed with a broad smile, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride, Shaw." Quentin didn't need to be told twice. He gathered Gabriel into his arms and kissed her with a tenderness that spoke of all they had overcome to reach this moment. The celebration afterward was joyous, with music and dancing continuing well into the evening. As the guests began to depart, Quentin found himself standing on the porch with Gabriel, watching the last wagon disappear down the road. "Mrs. Shaw," he said, testing the name with satisfaction. Gabriel leaned into his side, her head resting against his shoulder. "It has a nice sound to it." "Indeed it does." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Are you happy?" She turned in his arms to face him, her expression serene in the fading light. "More than I ever thought possible," she said honestly. "When I lost my family, I believed I'd never find a place to belong again. And then I arrived here with nothing but a basket of bread and hope." "And look what you built with that," Quentin marveled, gesturing toward the house where Thomas and Ellie could be heard laughing as they helped Mrs. Wilson and the other remaining guests clean up. "A family restored." "Our family," Gabriel corrected gently. "Our family," he agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys to the Shaw Ranch. The harsh Texas climate tested their resilience with droughts and storms. The cattle market fluctuated wildly. But within the walls of their home, the family Gabriel and Quentin had forged together thrived. Thomas grew into a young man with his father's strong build and his mother's gentle heart. His skill with horses became renowned throughout the county, and by his 18th birthday, he had started a small but successful business training mounts for the military at Fort Davis. Ellie blossomed into a thoughtful young woman whose quiet voice, once recovered, proved to have remarkable power when raised in song. Gabriel's patient instruction revealed a talent for music that might have remained hidden forever. And in the spring of 1876, the family welcomed a new addition, a daughter they named Hope, whose arrival brought joy and completion to the circle Gabriel had begun forming when she first walked up that dusty road. On warm evenings, the family still gathered on the porch, just as they had in those early days. But now, as Quentin played his harmonica and Gabriel sang along softly, with Thomas discussing his plans for the ranch's future and Ellie cradling her baby sister. There was no shadow of grief hanging over them, only the contentment of a family made whole again. Sometimes, Quentin would catch Gabriel's eye across the porch and see in her smile the same wonder he felt. That a chance encounter, a basket of bread offered in kindness, could lead to such profound happiness. In those moments, he was reminded that love, like bread, required simple ingredients but careful tending and, when done right, nourished body and soul alike. In Fort Davis, the story was still told years later, of the brave young woman who arrived with nothing but a basket of bread and left with a cowboy's broken family restored. But those who knew them best understood that the restoration had gone both ways, that in healing the Shaw family, Gabriel had also healed herself, finding in their love the home she had long been seeking.